Hello, this is just a short recording to give you a little bit more advice on the assignment and to show you some examples of coding tables. We've talked about them in class, but I haven't shown you an actual visual example yet. I've updated the PowerPoint that's uploaded onto Canvas so that the new version now includes copies of the table instead of some of the other stuff, which I suppose was not terribly relevant for your assignment. So just to recap, the word counts for the various sections of your content analysis are there on the slide, so I won't go over that breakdown again. But just to say, keep your abstract very concise and very short. The introduction should explain the area you're looking at, whether it's prisons or social media or religion, and specify it down. So if, for example, you are looking specifically at category A prisons, or you're looking specifically at media articles about TikTok, for example, then the introduction would go into that level of detail to say this is the specific area that you're looking at. You then go into your related research, which in other types of assignment is normally referred to as a lit review, where you are looking at past research, and if you can find it as close to possible as what you are looking at, rather than kind of very generic stuff. So for example, if you are doing your content analysis specifically on a few newspaper articles about TikTok, then if you can find any related research that is particularly about TikTok rather than just generic stuff about social media, then that would be ideal. That will bump up your grade because it will be quite specific to what you're looking at. And ideally, if you can mention one of the theorists who's done some of the research you've said in that section, also mention them again in the discussion section, so you're bringing it back to say that at least one of the theorists you mentioned in your related research is somebody you're going to mention in your discussion, because either you're agreeing with their research or you are challenging their research. The research question should be nice and short and concise. I'll give you a couple of examples of that, and just to reiterate what we said in class, one research question, possibly two at a push, is quite sufficient for the word count you've got. Any more than that, you're going to run out of time, or run out of words rather, in which to answer those research questions. We've gone over the universal content in class a couple of times, but just to recap, that the universal content is the overall body of possible leaflets, articles, whatever, books that you could have drawn on. Obviously, you're not going to list the title of every single one, but to give you an example that we've used in class before, if you decided you wanted to do an online search of a newspaper's website, The Sun, the Daily Mail, the Guardian, or whatever, you go on there, you type into the search engine articles about prisons or whatever it might be, and it will flag up a number of articles. It might say, well, there's 1,000 articles on this, in which case you would state in your method section under the subheading universal content that the universal content was 1,000 articles available via the Guardian website or the News of the World website or whatever, and these articles range in date for whatever research date parameters you've used. You might have been looking for any article at all ever written, or you might have been looking for something written within a specific time frame, but you'd put that up there. In your data collection, you state the specific articles or specific leaflets out of the great big mound of ones that you could have used. You state the specific ones that you did use, the 2 or 3 articles, leaflets, whatever it may be that you did use. So when were they published? Who wrote them, if you know indeed who did write them, and if there's no name of an author, as we said in class, then put the name of the publishing organisation. So, for example, if it was published by the Church of England or the Jehovah's Witnesses organisation or whatever, then you could use that as the identifier for who wrote it. And give some kind of justification for why you chose those 2 or 3 leaflets, 2 or 3 articles, whatever it may be. Doesn't have to be a very long justification, just that maybe they were published recently, so you felt they were very up to date, or they dealt with a very specific issue that you were looking at such as Category A prisons or TikTok or whatever it may be. Now, we'll move on to give you examples of the coding tables, rather than just talking about them in a very broad sense in a second. But to give you a couple of examples, 3 examples here, of research questions, it's so that gives you an idea of how to word them. They should be fairly short, fairly concise, and the sort of thing you could answer by the final end, the summary right at the end of your assignment. So something like, if you're doing the religious thing, you could go with, how do Jehovah's Witness leaflets present heaven? So you could then find a couple of leaflets about heaven, do your word analysis, your word count up, say, well, these words are used a great deal, therefore the language, the choice of words is how heaven is presented to anybody reading that particular set of leaflets. Or how do newspaper articles describe female prisoners compared to male prisoners? So you would then be looking up adjectives, words used about male prisoners. You'd then be looking for adjectives and words used about female prisoners, putting the words for male prisoners in one box, words for female prisoners in another box, and doing a comparison. It may be that the words are very similar, possibly, or it may be that the words for one sex are more flattering, more positive than the words for the other sex. So you could then look at why might there be a gender bias in that the newspapers present one type of prisoner in a rather more positive light than the other type of prisoner. What theories might explain why they do that? And finally, how do online articles present the risks to children of using social media? So you might find a few online articles maybe aimed at parents, aimed at teachers, highlighting what they need to be aware of about the risks their kids could be facing if they're using social media. And again, what language, what words, what terms are flagged up a lot. That would give you some theories. You say, well, this word was flagged up a great deal, therefore this word is conveying certain ideas, certain notions, certain meanings to the reader, and then link that into theory. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward. Now, in terms of presenting data on tables, you've got the units of data where you are defining the terms you're using. Now, just to remind you, the word count used inside the tables doesn't form part of your overall word count. A table is a separate thing. So you can put as much wordage on this as you like. Now, I've kept this very short in terms of the sample one you've got on the screen here. So a unit of data, the term prison, also includes prisoner, prisons. You could include other words as well, perhaps. Then you've got sort of negative adjectives there, where obviously prisoner, prisons, it's the same variations on the same word. That's fairly straightforward. But it could include words that are not linked in terms of how they're spelled or they're sort of grammatically linked, but words which you feel all form part of the same category. And so on your chart, you'd have a box saying negative adjectives and then giving a frequency number of how many were used. But this table here, the units of data, explains to the reader that you're including 4 words that you found in the newspaper articles: scum, crook, villains, thugs. So you've counted all of those words up and put them into one category, and that would just explain it to me as the reader. Now, you could go into a slightly more involved explanation than I've just put on here. I'm keeping this short and sweet to make things a little bit more easy. If you were looking at a professionally produced piece of content analysis in a journal article, they might well go into a bit more wordy of a justification about why they are putting the particular words that they're putting into a category. So, for example, why are they including paedophile in the negative sexual adjectives? Is paedophile actually a negative term, or is it a neutral word to describe a legal and indeed a psychiatric definition? I think it's fairly obvious that words like pedos and perverts is more overtly negative. That's fairly obvious. But some people might say, oh, well, paedophile is not negative, it's a legal category rather than an insult, whereas pedos and perverts is more obviously an insult. So possibly you might want to offer a justification, if you were doing this, for why that word is being classed as a negative rather than as a neutral term. But equally, you might just keep it quite short, depending on how you're doing for time and how close you are to the deadlines. Now, the coding table itself is fairly basic and straightforward and looks pretty much like the one here. So, looking at this, it would simply tell me, the reader, that you had found the word prison or prisoner, prisons, etc., 10 times, that you'd found 41 words that you classed as negative adjectives, that you'd found the words like pedo, paedophile, predator, etc., those sexual negative adjectives, 16 times. Now, this is version number 1, and I'm quite happy for you to use version number 1. This is a level 5 assignment, and you could just do this straightforwardly. I'm going to show you version number 2. If you want to use version number 2, by all means do, but it's the kind of version that would be more expected in, say, level 6 work or at master's level. So this is version number 2, and as you can see, it breaks it down a little bit more. So you've still got the unit of data, but it goes into each individual word. So the examples here, sexual negative adjectives are broken down. We know, as on the previous slide, there were 16 words altogether, but it's telling me, the reader, that specifically the word paedophile or pedo appeared 3 times, the word pervert appeared 5 times, the word predator appeared 8 times. So it's breaking it down by individual use of terms. Now, the reason this might be used at level 6 or at master's level is because with a higher word count, master's assignments tend to be bigger word counts, there might be a room to go into much more detailed analysis of these individual categories rather than just lumping everything together under one. But you've got quite a tight word count, which is why I'm happy for you to use version number 1, this version, which kind of collapses that level of detail into just the primary categories and the frequency numbers. Because you might just talk very broadly in your limited word count about the negative adjectives, the sexual negative adjectives, etc., etc., rather than going into breakdown of detail like you've got on version number 2. So do one or the other, but don't do both. That would be pointless. Either do version 1 or version 2, depending on how you feel you're going for time and so forth. Now, there is a descriptive stats table we've mentioned in class a few times. I wouldn't know I've explained this to you in class, and a lot of you knew it anyway. But just to very quickly recap before I show you the actual table, you've got the mean and the mode. Now, in other forms of research, there is also other descriptive stats, the median and the range. We're not going to be using the median and the range in content analysis because they're not particularly helpful in terms of explaining the level of data you're looking at. But I would like you to use the mean and the mode. So the mean, you look at everything in a particular category, add them all together, and divide by the number in the category. So let's say you've got 10 words in a given category, you add them all up, and then you divide by the number 10. And that gives you the mean, the average. The mode is whichever numbers, or in this case words, appear most frequently. So if a particular word appears way more often than any other word, that word is the mode because it appears most often. If you were doing other types of analysis, you might include the median, which is where you put everything in order from highest to lowest, most frequent to least frequent, and then you find the number, or in this occasion, the word in the middle. And say that one is the middle value. And the range, you take the highest number away from the, other way around. You take the lowest number away from the highest number. And that gives you the broad range of data. But that's primarily used in more overtly analytical quantitative data. What we're doing for this assignment is more basic quantitative data. So mean and mode are primarily what you need to use. Now, you could just stick in a table with numbers. If they're correct, it's worth a few points. But if you offer an explanation for what the numbers mean, that will bump up your grade because it shows you understand the assignments that you're looking at. Now, in terms of an example of presenting that descriptive data, at the right-hand side, you can see the mode and the mean for just this one category, the sexual negative adjectives. So you've got the breakdown by terms, paedophile, pervert, predator, etc. You've got the frequency for each individual type of word, 3, 5 and 8. You've got the total there, 16 altogether. The mean, we've added 3 plus 5 plus 8 and then divided that by 3 because there's 3 categories. So 16 divided by 3 is 5.33. And the most frequently occurring word, the mode, is predator, which occurs 8 times more than any other of the words. Therefore, the mode is 8, is predator. So that's just the table with the numbers on. The explanation, these are very short explanations here because I couldn't fit much more on the screen without the font size becoming illegible. So if you were doing this, chuck in a bit of theory. But you could explain the mode by saying that the mode shows that the word predator appears 8 times more often than any other, most frequently used word. Why is predator more frequently used than pervert or paedophile or pedo? Possibly because predator, it's a word we associate with dangerous animals, lions and tigers and what have you. And maybe by using that word a lot, the journalists in question are emphasizing to the reader that they perceive sex offenders as rather like dangerous animals in a jungle. They are less than human, they're predatory, they're dangerous, they're deadly, they're barely even human. And then you could link to some theory that explains why certain types of people might be seen as more animalistic than others. And of course, it's fairly obvious why they're emphasizing the danger posed by sex offenders, but you could nonetheless find a theory that would link into that. In terms of explaining the mean, the 5.33, you could start by comparing it to other means. So let's say the mean here of 5.33 was higher than the mean in the category you had for positive words used about inmates and prisons, not about sex offenders, just about criminals in general, inmates in general. Let's say the mean for the positive words was 4.2, so obviously 5.33 is higher than 4.2. And what does that indicate? Well, you could say that that means the journalists have a very wide array of terms for sex offender. They've got 3 different terms for sex offender. Well, 4 if we distinguish paedophile and pedo. So 4 terms as such for sex offenders. And I don't know how many words there were in the positive category. Let's say there were 2, for argument's sake. And so it's reflective that the sheer volume of negative words is suggestive of the level of vitriol dreamed up. The shorter range of words being used in a positive context means maybe that those journalists are struggling to think of anything nice to say about prisoners and anything positive to describe them in terms of, I don't know, whatever, reforming prisoners or doing work for charity or whatever they may be doing, to say anything positive about them. And then you could start to think, are there any theories that would explain why the journalists are more worked up about sex offenders and why they are struggling to think of much of anything positive to say about prison inmates in general. So that would be that explanation of what the numbers mean. You could give a very short explanation underneath the table and then bring in the theory more in the discussion section to say why, whose theories would help explain the choice of words. Hopefully that's relatively straightforward for you, but if you've got any questions, obviously do ask, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible by email. Take care, bye-bye.